I'm going to go ahead and start the video. I'll just let the thing run. And waiting to see if anybody else shows up here at the last second for Zoom. But you'll see I have a chunk of gum paste here that is about a chunk. It's maybe, a third to a half of what I had in this bag. I don't need a lot. It doesn't take a lot of gum paste to do the trick for these. I've got my two buds here, and the buds are really going to be the base of your flour. One thing I probably neglected to mention while we're waiting, let me get some more horseshoe cups out of here. It's good to have a little bit of water nearby. It doesn't take much. I'm just going to have a tablespoon of water. But the idea is that gum paste will stick to itself, but it sticks much better if you get a little moisture on it. That said, you'll see I can very carefully control where I put my moisture. I don't want to have too much. But I want to have a little bit around, just in case. Now, there are lots of people out there who will use a brush. I use my fingertip. I usually stick my finger in the water, I shake off the excess, and I just moisten. I'm not looking to make it wet. I just want to moisten it a little bit, just so it has a little bit more stickiness. I've got my duster, just in case I need it. Extra gum paste. Got a couple of tools nearby. Your gum paste toolkit is, it's got everything, pretty much everything you need to do what you need to do here. The one thing your gum paste toolkit does not have is a little tool here. It's pointy, and I have it in my bucket. It's called a star tool, and it's handy for small blossoms. Although I could just use this other end, which is just a round pointed tool for blossoms. That works too. But the star, what it does is it creates little division lines for each petal. There are 5-point stars and there's 6-point stars, and they both work fine. If you're in the bucket and you see a star tool, grab it. You may find it's nice to know it's right nearby. I like to get all my mise en place right here, so I don't have to go running over there to get stuff. And you'll see these tools vary quite a bit. These are really, really cheapo Chinese tools, okay? I got these on Alibaba about 7-8 years ago, back when Alibaba was still a new thing. And you can still get something from China in about 3 weeks. Now it's about 3 months. But, as I wanted to get a bunch of them fast, and I didn't want to spend a lot of time and don't spend a lot of money. But they work fine. They work fine. Your tools are actually quite good. These are made by Wilton, and they're metal tipped. They're going to last you for a long time. They're really good quality tools. I do have a ball tool. My ball tools are not nearly as pretty as yours, but they work. The important thing about a ball tool is it's smooth. That's just the most important thing about it. Smooth ball. I think the others will probably come along here soon, so I'm just going to get started here since things are recording. I'm going to color this. I think I'm going to use yellow for my roses today. I had told the others before some of you showed up that you can get dark colors if you want a really red, like dark red. I have some red fondant back there, and the red fondant can be, let's say 3 ounces of red fondant to 1/4 teaspoon of this gum tragacanth powder will give you, and you knead the two together until they're thoroughly mixed, that will give you the equivalent of dark red gum paste. That's the one thing that fondant is missing. Fondant does not have very much gum tragacanth in it, but gum paste has lots. And they're basically the same thing. It's just that gum paste doesn't taste as good, and it has a lot more gum tragacanth in it. So I also have a bucket of black back there, so if any of you really wanted to make a black rose, you could. But I'm gonna go ahead and make some yellow. So I'm just gonna take my piece of gum paste here. I know that I'm gonna use all this for yellow. And if I have leftover yellow for my roses, I can also do some small blossoms in yellow. I love doing forsythia. Now, if you've never seen a forsythia, if you've ever seen somebody has a big bush in their front yard with a lot of yellow flowers on it, that's called a forsythia bush. Little four petal flowers, tiny little guys, but they're really beautiful when paired with other flowers to make a nice arrangement. So I figure if I have a little extra, I'll just use that. But I'm just going to put a little yellow on here and work it in. It's not a lot of color, just a little, you know. I don't want to make it like, you know, electric yellow. And I'm just going to knead this and knead it. Now, I sometimes notice that my gum paste will feel a little dry. If that's the case, or also if it gets sticky, if your gum paste starts getting a little bit sticky, just reach over here with your finger, grab a little bit of shortening, rub it on your hands. I'm just going to rub it on my hands, and suddenly it won't stick to you anymore, and it conditions your gum paste. Your gum paste actually gets better. It feels better, smoother, more elastic. There's a lot of good things that start happening. So as you can see, this is turning yellow. I'm going to get it thoroughly mixed in so everything is even. And this is pretty yellow. But that's okay. This is a base color. And I always think when I'm working with gum paste, I work with a base color. Remember, tomorrow we're going to do finishing work, which means that we can take that base color and we can alter it by using dry brushes and dry petal dust color to make enhance what we have. So I don't worry if something is not perfect in color. For example, if I was making, you know, like a yellow one, it could be a basic yellow color and it's not exciting by itself, but it will look better tomorrow once I enhance it. I'll probably do like I do on that one that's floating around here that has red tips on it. Maybe yellow with red tips on the end. A little bit more shortening. Tiny bit of shortening goes a long way, and it just helps to condition your gum paste, and I knead it well. Now, if you have any other colors you wanted to do, now would be a good time to do that. So I'm going to start with roses, but if I wanted to do some filler flowers in blue, I could take a little chunk, make some blue, put that under my plastic to keep it protected. So you'll see I've got pretty good yellow fondant here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to start by making some balls that I'm going to use for petals. You can if you like. I'm going to make some balls, and when I make balls, I'm just making little balls. These are about the size of a small marble, maybe about the size of a hazelnut. And I'm going to start by just making a series of these because each one's going to be a petal. When I make a rose, I tend to make them fairly simple. I'm going to make a large rose and a small rose. So I'm going to do what I call a rose bud, and I'm going to do a full-size rose. And they are going to work nicely together because they'll be different sizes, and I can tape them together, and they'll look really pretty. So you see, I got 4 right there. That would be enough. 4 would be enough for my small rose bud. But then I need more for my bigger rose. Now, I'm going to start off my rose with one petal that goes around my rose bud, and then I'm going to put 3 around that for the small rose. That will be a rose bud. So 1 and 3. I always use odd numbers. The second one's going to be a little bit bigger. It's going to be 1, then 3, and then 5. So 1 plus 3 is 4 plus 5. I need a total of 9 balls for that. So I'm making a bunch of balls. Each one's going to be a petal. And you'll notice I put them right under the plastic. Keep them soft. Keep them supple. So Brennan, since you're just coming in, you can go ahead and start setting up. Some of the things you're going to need right away. I get a little cup with a little bit of shortening in it, just a little bit to have it around. A little cup with a little bit of water in it. You want to make yourself a duster. I have some cheesecloth and string over here. You're just going to put a little bit of powdered sugar inside. And what that does is it does exactly what it says it does. It dusts. So it's perfect for, just adding a little bit of dust when you need it. Yeah, I'm doing one with 4 and one with 4 and one with 9. Yeah.
Snapchat in the group chat, so I'm wondering if it was a picture of that one.
Well, I've got Kat on here. Keisha has joined us, and Isaiah has joined us. So.
Maybe she was saying she was right there.
That's 6. And I'm not going to throw away this color. If I have extra, I'm not going to throw it away. I'll put it in a bag. And I usually like to create a bucket of random colors. You never know when they'll come in handy. And someone may say someday, I really just need some yellow. And they look in the bucket of random and they find a chunk like that. They'll be like, score. That's exactly what I needed. Or they need it to mix with something else to make another color. Because after all, I could say, I like this yellow, but I'd like it to be, a little more orange. I could add some red to it, and I could end up with a nice orange color. All right, so there I'm almost ready for building these 2 roses with the amount of balls I have. Hey.
Do you have citric acid too?
Citric acid? That's back in the office.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
It should be on the shelf. I think there's the shelves right in the middle of the room. There should be a container of citric acid.
Should I go get it?
You could. I think it's open.
Yep, thank you.
So, you see what that camera is? The phone?
Yeah, okay. All right.
Yeah, so this is recording, and I'll end up putting this on YouTube. I've also got the computer here with Zoom, so we've got 3 people watching on Zoom, so that they can see live. But let's say they want more, they want to see it again. They'll be able to go on YouTube and see the exact same video on YouTube, albeit from a different angle, but still. Okay, so I've got all of these balls ready to go. These are all going to be petals. And I'm going to set some of these off to the side so I can have some working space underneath my plastic, but I'll show you guys what I'm doing as I'm going here. All right, so I'm a little closer up now. You can see I've set one aside here, just all by itself. And this is where this handy dandy tool comes in. I love this thing. I use my thumb sometimes, just my thumb, but this makes my thumb bigger and smoother and wider. This is great for flattening out petals. Now, a petal, to make it look lifelike, we need to have the petal thin. After all, when you look at a real rose petal, it's not thick. It's very, very thin. But if we made a rose petal out of gum paste as thin as a real rose petal, it could never handle it. It would fall over. Gravity would just make it bend over. So instead, what I do is I make the edge very thin to create the illusion that it's a real rose petal. But the base and the middle is pretty thick, and that's to give it physical strength. Because obviously we're not able to make it absolutely realistic, but we can fool the eye. And that's really what we're doing. We're just creating the illusion. So I'm just gonna flatten this down. And as I'm doing it, I'm flattening the edge and I'm spreading that out. The middle in here and the bottom is pretty thick still. But just the edge is really thin. Now I've seen people do this with a bowl scraper. I like using a spoon myself. but I've seen people use plastic bowl scrapers, and they work too. Really, any tool that will help you make something thin. Now, to give you an idea of how thin this is, you could probably see this side fairly thick, right? This side, so thin that it just bends right over. So very, very thin on this side. If you have trouble getting it thin under the plastic, the next step would be to intentionally make it thin. And we can do that. We can take our duster. I can dust, put my petal down. I'll dust the petal a little bit. And then that's where my ball tool comes in. When you're using a ball tool, you're going to be working on the very edge of your petal. But you're not going to go directly on the petal. You're going to be half on, half off. So I'm going to take my ball tool and just go along that edge. And just right here, you can see it's half on, half off the petal. So it's on mostly on the foam, because all I'm really trying to do is thin that edge. I'm trying to make that edge so paper thin that it looks absolutely real. I'm not worried that my petal isn't perfectly smooth on the edge too. It looks a little uneven. That's okay. Take a look at a real rose sometime. They're not perfect. Nature gets to them. Bugs, bees, birds, all kinds of things. So they get a little beat up, and that's okay. That's normal for a rose. I'm going to set my little pad aside here. I've got this petal ready to go. I'm going to go ahead and add it to my first bud. And the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to go ahead and take my water. I'm going to dip my finger in it a little bit. Shake off some of the excess. And I'm just going to moisten. The base and up to about the middle of this petal. So it's a little bit shiny right in there, right in the middle. Dry my finger off. And I'm going to apply this petal to this rosebud. Now what I'm going to do here is I'm going to set the rosebud right in the middle of the petal. I'm going to wrap one side around the petal, around the rosebud rather. And because it's moist, it will stick. Remember, the rosebud is made of gum paste too. So because of that, it will stick pretty well to this little bud. Then once I've got that wrapped around, I'm just going to go ahead and take the other side and close it up. And as I do that, it should close pretty completely. If it has any difficulty closing, you have an opening here where you can see down into the rose. I just take my little tool and I just help that first fold just close up. I don't want to see that white bud under there. I want to just see the petal closed in around it. Now to make sure things are going to close correctly here, I'm just going to go ahead and add a little tiny bit more moisture, just to make sure things are moist enough to stick to themselves. I'm just going to close that in. And that's the beginning of my rose right there. It's just closed in around that rosebud. And sure, there's some extra stuff hanging on the bottom. Don't worry about that. We'll take that off later. But I'm going to go in here and I'm just going to just make sure that that is closed in real nice and tight. Because when you look in the center of a rose, what you see is that little curl tightens up real tight in the middle. So I think you guys can see that pretty well. Basically, I've wrapped it around once. From one direction, I wrapped it around from the left, and then I wrapped the right one around that, just to make sure it was all closed in. And I'm just going to set this to the side for a moment while I get another petal ready. Because now, the next one that's going to go on there's going to be 3 more that go on the outside of this. So I have extra gum paste hanging out here at the bottom. As you can see, just extra scrap material down here. I'm not going to worry about that. I'm just going to trim that off later. So I'll set it over here just to relax for a moment. Let's make another petal. Actually, 3 more. 1, 2, 3. So I'll start these with my thumb. And I'm just really just flattening them down a little bit. I'm going to do the same thing I did with the other ones. I'm going to go ahead and just start pressing it out with the spoon. And I'm pressing it out but leaving that one side thick so that'll be the bottom. And as I get toward the edge, I'm really thinning it out along the edge. A lot of the time, I don't need to ball tool my petals. A lot of times I can get them thin enough underneath the plastic. But if I feel like it needs to be a little thinner, then I'll go use the ball tool and just thin it out. After all, if it's not thin, it doesn't look realistic to me. There's 1, 2.
No. So you're gonna use powdered sugar or 29 but there's also some already done. You don't have the knife.
There are some dusters already there in the container, so if you want to just grab one, you can. I said most people make their own so that we have enough for everybody.
Before you leave, go wire that up.
So are the petals that you're making like mostly round, oblong?
Yeah, they're sort of roundish, sort of teardrop in a way. I'm just, if I need to, if they feel like they're a little too narrow, I'll give them a little pull to widen them. But generally, yeah, I'm not too worried about the shape as much. It's sort of ovalish. Thicker at the bottom, obviously. Much thicker at the bottom than they are at the top. Now this one hasn't been ball tooled at all. This one is just thin. I'll set that over here. The other ones, this one's pretty nice and thin. I don't think I need to ball tool it. A lot of times under the plastic, I can press this edge pretty thin with that spoon, and I can get that edge pretty darn thin. But if it needs it, I will use the ball tool if I have to. If it feels like it's thick, or I see a thick spot. All right, so I've got 3 of these here ready to go. Now, here's my original bud. I'm going to go ahead and get a little bit of water. And I am just going to moisten each of these petals just a little bit. I'm going to moisten them mostly on the bottom and up into the middle just a little bit so that they just have enough moisture. I don't want to get moisture all the way up to the top because I want the tops to be able not to stick too much. I want them to be able to be free to move. So I can make them not just stick inward, but splay outward a little bit, give a little bit of room and air in between those petals. So I'm making these a little bit moist in the center and in the bottom. And again, if I feel like I have a little too much moisture, I'll just dry off my finger. I want to very carefully limit how much moisture I put on these. All right, so I'm going to apply my first of my second row of petals. I'm just going to cover this joint area. That joint area looks a little ugly. I'm going to go ahead and cover that first. But you could really put it anywhere you want. And what I'm going to try to do is make the petals roughly about the same height or maybe slightly higher than my center. And the reason why is because they're not going to stay straight up and down. They're going to bend outward and they're going to splay outward a little bit. So I'm going to attach it here. It is moist. I'm going to bring it on around and I'm going to leave one side open. And the reason why is because the next petal is going to go underneath that one. So my second petal is going to go in where this opening is. I'm going to slide that in. And underneath here, what I'm doing is I'm using my fingers to close in the first one around the second one. And I'm going to leave the second one open now. And the third one is going to go in that opening. And again, I'm closing in the second one now around the third one. And as the third one comes around, I'm just going to let it close up all the way. And what you can start to see is you can start to see it coming to life. You can start to see the beginning of a rose. Now, because I have not wet the top of these petals, they're free. They are not stuck to anything. So I'm gonna take a little tool here. I'm just gonna kind of open these up a little bit because they're tending to crowd inward a little bit. So I'm letting the tips bend outward a little bit, just a little, to give them a little more life. And when I'm pretty happy with it, as you can see, it's the three have come together here around the center. I'm going to go around the bottom here. Now I've got a lot of extra material here at the bottom. A lot of extra material. I'm just going to go around my fingers now and pinch. I'll turn it here so you guys can see it. It's going to pinch, pinch, pinch all the way around. And that bottom extra material, the waste material, is just going to get thinner and thinner as I go around. And it'll eventually get skinny enough where I can just pull it away. So you can see how it's getting, the throat in the bottom there is getting bigger. That's all the scrap material I had extra. But the petals now are attached, so I don't need this scrap material. And as I go around, I'll just twist it away. And put that aside. I've got a couple small issues I want to address. One, I've got a petal here that's coming inward really far. I'm going to help that. I'm going to help kind of encourage and entice that one to come outward a little bit. And get it to curl outward. This one is sticking straight up. I'm going to go ahead and give it a chance to curl outward a little bit. And that little guy is going to be my rosebud. So that's just a really simple small one, right? It's just a little small rose. And I'm just going to set it over here on the side. I've got a little hole in my foam pad that I can just set it in to dry. It'll just sit here and just dry up straight up. If your petals have a tendency to be thin and they tend to fold over, you can hang these upside down so that gravity pulls them back up. If you were to do that, usually you don't have the problem because you haven't let your whole petal be too thin. But if it is thin, and you're going, wow, it just keeps bending over, and that gravity is really my enemy here, make a hook and hang it upside down. So I can use this shelf over here. I could just hang this upside down on the shelf. It could be anywhere. It could be on a water bottle. It could be on the bucket. But it will help your petals stay straight up because they're hanging upside down. Mine, on the other hand, don't seem to have that problem, so I'm going to set mine right side up. So I'm going to stick it in here to hold it for a moment. So now I'm ready to go for my second rose. So I'm going to go back to my stock here of balls, and I'm going to go ahead and make a center petal for that new rose. So again, I'm going to flatten it on down. Leaving the bottom and the middle pretty thick in here. And then really focusing on my edges. Trying to get my edges spread out and thin. Remember, they're going to be thin, and if it's just the edge, they'll dry pretty quickly because they're thin. If they're that thin and they dry pretty quickly, you won't have much of a problem. The hard part is when the whole petal is thin. Then it makes it harder to work with because it dries, but in the meantime, you're fighting against gravity. There's Chef Jen. Okay, so there's my first petal for my next rows, and I notice the bottom is a little narrow, so I'm going to go ahead and just pull it a little and widen it a little bit. But basically, I still have a thick bottom. I have a very thin edge, very, very thin edge. And that's the idea, is that the edge is thin, the middle and the bottom have some body to them so that they'll have some strength. So with that ready to go on the rows, I'm going to go ahead and moisten my bud a little bit so that everything will stick to it just fine. Remember, your buds are made of gum paste, so the minute water touches them, they're going to start getting slimy and sticky. That's okay for a bud because that'll help that initial petal stick nicely. And as long as you've been keeping your petals underneath plastic, generally they'll stay moist and they'll stay nice. So again, here we go. I'm going to put this right here on the bud. Petals going on. I'm going to I wrap my left side around first. So I'm going to wrap my left side around, get that nice and wrapped around, and then I'm going to go ahead, as soon as I'm pretty satisfied with how tight it is, I'm just going to go ahead and wrap the right side around to close that bud in. And again, don't worry about the scrap at the bottom. It will be removed later. But my tip is nice and closed. You cannot see my bud down through the tip. It's a very, very small opening. And that's the idea. The bud, you shouldn't see that bud. That would be a dead giveaway that it's not the real thing. And after all, we want to create that illusion that it just might be the real thing. So as I set that aside, I'll set 3 balls here to make 3 more petals, and that'll be, I'm basically doing the same thing I did with my rose bud. The big difference is later I'm going to do 5 more on the outside, wrap it all around the outside to make a much larger rose. So why do I use my thumb sometimes? Well, I can feel with my thumb. So I can feel that I have my middle and my bottom is still thick and my edge is nice and thin. I can actually feel that through my glove. I can't feel that well with a spoon. So that's why sometimes you'll see me use my thumb. It's not that it's a better tool than the spoon. It's just that because I can feel it, I've got some control. There's one. Okay, there's getting to be 2. So what I'm doing here is going along my very edge with my spoon just to really feather that edge to make it super thin. And my third one, starting off with my thumb, getting my edge thin, my middle and my bottom fairly thick still. All right, so with 3 petals ready to go here. Again, so nice thick bottom, really thin top. So I'm going to set these out of the plastic so I can moisten them. And when you see me doing this, I pull them out and I take a look at them. And if it needs it, I'll maybe widen the bottom a little bit. I'll adjust it slightly with my fingers just to try to get them all about the same size. That's all I'm doing, is just trying to get them about the same size so it makes it easier to place them on and they all look like they belong together. All right, a little bit of moisture, just tiny bit. Now really, this little bit of moisture is a little bit. The idea there is really just so that they will stick where they're placed and they're not going to move. I don't want to really soak them because I just want to use the natural reaction between the water and the sugar in this petal to help it get a little bit stickier. All right, so I'm gonna go back to where I was here. Here's a little, my first petal going around. I'm going to place my first of my second row right over the original joint. And I'm just gonna close it in on one side and leave the other side open. I'll take my second petal, tuck it under the first petal, and that will wrap, the first petal will wrap around the second, and the second will remain open. And then I'm going to take my third petal and tuck it under the second petal, wrapping it on around so the three petals kind of fit together. Okay, so for right now, there I am with three petals. They're all standing straight up or even leaning inwards. So I'm going to take my tool here. I'm going to gently splay them outward a little bit to create a little bit of airspace in between the center and these three petals. Now remember, this one's going to get 5 more on the outside. So this one's starting to come together. It looks like the rosebud that I just made, but it's going to get 5 more petals on the outside of this one. So I've got this waste material down here that I've been squeezing a little bit. I'm just going to leave that there for a moment until I get the other 5 on, because I'm going to have a lot more waste material once I get the 5 on there. So set that aside for a moment. It's time to make 5 more petals. So I've spread these all out a little bit inside my plastic. And the idea here is that they're going to get bigger, so I need to make a little room. So again, I'm starting these off with my thumb, and I'm just feeling as I'm going. I'm just feeling it. I got my edges thin, but my center here and my bottom are nice and thick so that they will support themselves. Now I'm going to finish these. I'm going to get these, do some more finishing work with the spoon, but my thumb is doing a good job of getting these started. Now what do you do if you make a petal and it's too thin all the way through? You find you've made the middle thin, the bottom thin, the top thin, and it's floppy and it's a mess.
Start over.
Ball it up and start over, yeah. It's so much easier than trying to struggle with it. If it's too thin, it's too thin, and it's just going to make your life frustrating. So it's easier just to ball it up and make another one. It doesn't take that long to make make one little petal. So the few minutes you spend making a new petal is worth it. It's so much less frustration. And life's too short to get stressed out, right? I mean, if you're making roses with gum paste and you're sitting there sweating and you're frustrated and you feel that heat starting to rise up, it's like, okay, time to take a walk. Time to take a break. Take a deep breath. Make a new petal. You know, you don't want to feel that. So I'm going around each of these petals, doing my edges, because I've already done a lot of the work with my thumb. And I'm just feeling them a little bit, and then I'm just kind of going around those edges, getting them nice and thin, spread out to a decent size. And generally, they're about the same size, right? They're all roughly the same size. These are about silver dollar size, because there are going to be 5 of them wrapped all the way around. I figure they don't need to be quite as big as the first one was. All right, so I'm pulling all 5 of mine out from under the plastic. And I'm pulling them out so they can be moistened and then applied to this second rose. Now, because I'm only pulling them out for a few seconds right before I use them, they never really get a chance to dry out. But if you were to get distracted and these set out for any amount of time, they would start to dry out pretty quickly, especially the thinner areas. They get quite stiff fairly quickly. That's okay as long as, you know, you're ready for it and they're in a position where it's okay for them to dry out. It gets frustrating when you're not ready and you feel like, oh wow, it's happening too fast. So getting ready for putting these on, I'm just going to work a couple of petals at a time, get them on where they need to be, and then I'll wet the others. So at the very most, I'm moistening the bottom half of a petal, leaving the top half unmoistened so it won't stick to things that I don't want it to stick to. All right, so when you're doing your first row of 5, you don't have any spot to really cover up. Here I've got, it's all about the same everywhere. So I'm just gonna just place my first petal wherever I want. And that'll just be the starting point. I'm gonna leave one side open so that I can tuck my next petal underneath it. And then as I close that first one around the second one, I'll leave the second one open. Grab a little moisture, moisten the bottom half of one of my next petals. So they're moist and ready to go. And I just have to emphasize how little moisture I use. I use a very little, just enough to get it a little bit tacky so that it makes it easier to stick it in place. But I don't want it to be wet because it will just start sliding and getting slippery, and you know how sugar loves water, so it'll just start to melt and if it has too much moisture. So there's my 4th one in place. My 5th one is ready here, and I give it a little bit of moisture on the bottom half. Anytime I've got moisture on my finger, I'll dry off with a dry rag nearby to make sure I don't have excess moisture on my fingers. And I'm just going to put this 5th one in place. Okay, so there we go. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 are around there. I'm gonna go around the base now, and I'm just gonna kind of pinch together any of this waste material. And just so you guys can see what I'm doing here, I've got this waste material. I'm just kind of going around with my fingers until it gets skinny enough, and then I'll just pull it away. Now I don't worry about what it looks like on the bottom, because honestly, I'm going to be covering that up with tape. I'm going to use floral tape to cover up the bottom and to make the bottom look nice. So if I have a little smear of yellow gum paste on my tape here, it's okay. I'm going to be putting fresh layer of tape around here. So here I've got all these petals, and they're really close together. Some of them are attached to each other. I want to open this up a little bit. So I'm going to take some of these petals and I'm just going to splay them open a little bit. Having a little curl at the ends really adds a lot of lifelike quality to your rose petals. Some people will pre-curl their petals, but I find by the time I get them on the rose, the curls have disappeared and I have to do it again anyway. So I just do it afterwards, after I attach them. So just to give you an idea of how this all looks, it's really just going down there with a little tool. I don't try to use my fingers because my fingers are too big to fit in these little nooks and crannies. All right, so to give you an idea where I'm at here, yeah, so I've got this one with the 1, 3, and then 5, and I've got this other one with just 1 and 3. The 1 and 3 one I can tell by feeling it that some of these petals are starting to stiffen up and dry a little bit. So while the petals are still soft, you can move them. You can model them and move them around a little bit, make little adjustments. But there's going to come a point where it's too hard, the gum paste is hardened and you can't make any more changes. But for right now, for the immediate time period, you've got the ability to make these little bits of adjustment to how much curl there is in each one and how they look. Yeah, so to give you an idea of where I'm at. Rosebud, more full-size rose. And all I've done is go with a simple yellow base color. Now some people have asked me, hey, why don't we just color them today? Why don't we just put the dry color on today? Well, when this gum paste is moist like this, it's still moist. If you tried to put dry color on here, it would blotch. It's just because it's dry and this is moist. So these need to dry overnight so that the surface has thoroughly dried out. That really helps it to accept the color better, and the pores become more open and more willing to accept that color. The dry color is just a powdered pigment, and we just put it on dry. We do it with a dry brush. So that's why I compare it to like makeup. Makeup is very similar in many ways. Like eye makeup, it's not usually a liquid, right? It's more dry, or it's a drier paste, and it's spread, and it's thinned, and it's feathered, very, very soft. The idea with eye makeup is to not have it blotchy, right? You want it smooth. You want smooth transitions. You want nice gradients. That's what we're going to try to do with these flowers. Beautiful, soft gradients, because that's how nature is too. Nature doesn't come with hard lines. Nature's full of all kinds of nice, soft gradients. So I'm going to let these sit here and dry for a little bit. No one's raised their hand to call out. No. Yeah. You can see how this getting a little bit of cabbage. And this is speaking to the surface here, partly because of the amount of moisture that's on it. And any chances the size of it.
Yeah, I think mine.
I like to
This
see
one
the
looks decent.
openings here. Be able
It's
to
not
travel
awesome.
downwards. So
Yeah,
I'll try to keep that moisture just in the base
Yeah.
of each petal. This one could easily be worked on by
It's all
simply,
together.
it's
flowers. I'm so
Yeah, I'd be happy with that,
Cover
yeah.
up the silver with cabbage.
Proud of myself, because I was talking
And
about
we can make them that.
Yeah, you were.
From the bottom,
Yeah,
so that we
I'm
can
feeling
open
anxiety
them
actually right now.
Yeah.
so they'll go to the same
Should we
space
sweat it?
that
Well,
we see from the top.
it's
I
more
like to see
red.
each petal like
Yeah,
this.
well, I just stopped breathing, because I was like,
And these are pretty stiffy all the way up here to this one.
Get in my head.
And you can see Chloe says, Chloe's in this space going down deeper. And it's probably because she's really trying to keep that moisture at the very bottom.
it's just, I hate where I
Bottom
put
border.
this
So
one.
it's pretty stiff, but
That thing is small.
it's pretty good control.
It's like one petal that just was done.
But both of these could be like if you want. If you don't want to have the outside ropes, you could have another row of petals. And this is makes the going on the pattern of the and you want to see this, but it doesn't need to be
Oh, yeah.
These could be a lot of dry ones too. They're pretty nice. See how this petal here is just moving down.
There's no,
As a dry, it's not going to do that. I think if you just sit up like this. So right now it's still here.
this or that?
The big one, maybe it's hang upside down. That would be one kind of candidate for hanging upside down. Just draw the full rest of one petal down. It's good you got it thin. But the fact that they are so thin, you need to probably kind of looking to pull them on back. Sometimes what I do is let's keep it hanging that up.
I'm gonna say that Chloe and I can just stay on the phone, like, I need to stop messing with it.
Yeah, what's that phrase? Like, perfection is the enemy of good.
I just. It looks like a wilting rose.
Hey, perfect.
It's dying.
It's realistic.
Put the hook on there, it's hanging up. There's a gravity will pull it to stand it up. And as it dries a little, this will stick with, you'll be able to turn it back upside down. The right side up again. I know, moisture is one of the things that's hard to contend with because you want little moisture, and not so much that you end up with the mass.
Yeah, mine's
Really
sort of
gonna slide.
slide. Yeah, that's what my first one
You
did.
can get kind of slimy, yeah. Sugar is just, it's just melting. And that's what this stuff is, it's almost like sugar. So,
So mine is so moist. I almost don't feel like I need water.
right, and you can see how thin it is.
Right, right.
I'd like to see that kind of thin stuff here. Yeah, and I've got, yeah. Yeah, I would say, it's gonna fight those things, so. ideally, so I'll draw a picture of what I do with my petals. So if I have a petal, the thicker area so right along, especially along this outer edge, it's really thin. But down in here, I keep it pretty thick, especially up here in the middle, because this area can get thin and then the whole thing starts to just give in to gravity.
Right.
So I'm really conscious of that, just to use the edge as the illusion.
Yeah.
And it can be a little tricky to get the perfect texture, the perfect thickness. This is pretty good. This is more thickness than here.
Yeah, that's the one I just redid.
As you can see, this one here, you'll see some thinness, little too much thinness down here in the middle. But that's, it is much easier to work with when it's not too thin. Well, just thin on the edge. Some people will just do it like I do it, but then they leave it a little thick and they take it out here and just ball to it so that the rest of it becomes a little more custard.
So when I was watching YouTube videos on how to do this, I obviously probably didn't know how to, but they like rolled it out and then cut it out with like a teardrop shape basically. And then just use the ball tool along the edge so like you have it more thickness throughout.
And with that method, that's what you do in Jen's class. You'll have to then put each petal into a little cup, into a little form, in order to allow it to partly dry before you apply. That way they're relatively thin all the way across the whole petal, except for the edge. And they will be too weak as is. So then what you have to do is let it get stiff, and then you can apply them while it's starting to stiffen up.
Which is probably why I had problems because I wasn't waiting for them to dry.
Typically we use, we always get the dividers from apple boxes. They're the most curvature. The rest of the apples is make it very dry place for the petals.
Oh, it was you.
But you can buy special things for it. You can buy special drying trays.
I don't know if I'm that like come without over here because I'm probably creating like a straight cylinder rather than like.
They're going straight up. If they're not moistened, then you usually can take a tool and help open them up. But they're really adhere to the other layers underneath them. So they just like open up. It takes a little bit of time.
Probably too So why don't we line them all up and just kind of roll it as we, and shape it kind of as we go?
Well, we can do that with materials that don't stick together so much as this. But these, even when they're freshly rolled like this, they can stick together quite well, even when they're using a mixture. I do it that way with bread dough. So first I want to make a really set of bread dough. I can make the roll out the dough, let's say 8-inch thick, circles. And then just line them up and roll them up. And because they have a little flour on them, they don't stick together so much, so I can then split them out a little bit. And works well with things like that. Just gets that it's not so difficult to do yourself. Let's start on the other hand. Even without this, you can see how moist it is. This is exactly what we're doing. And they're really thin. Big, you can still have do that. So here you go.